All I know is get it. The OGs always told me what I start, I gotta finish. So I push it to the limit, so I can be the greatest. So I can look my family in their eyes and say we made it. Don't let life hand you nothing, you just gotta go take it. Always keep it 100, don't ever let me catch you faking. Keep a close eye on your...
Hey y'all, welcome to the very first episode of the Post-Prison Podcast, Pursuing Life After the Plantation. I'm your host, businessman and entrepreneur, Darryl, and joining me is my very good friend and sister, Miss Cynthia Brady. Also, we have as our very first special guest, Chief of Staff for the County Auditor, Chief of Staff for the County Auditor, Mr. Daryl Daugs. Hey, sir. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. I want to start off by thanking the team that helped us put this together, from the people that wrote the logo, to the website creators, to the Facebook people, to Cynthia, to our production team. I just want to thank you guys. We wouldn't have been able to get to this space without you because it's a lot of work. So just to get into why we're here and who are we, as I stated, my name is Daryl Riley. I'm a business owner now, community leader, involved in a lot of organizations, but it wasn't always like that. I've had a rough life with drugs and prison a few times, and found myself in situations that wasn't beneficial to myself or my family. But all that's changed from today. You can read more about our stories on our website. But joining me is my good friend and sister, who's a substance abuse professional, Miss Cynthia Brady. Miss Cynthia Brady, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Brady. I'm a recovery counselor, substance use disorder professional, and I work here in the county, Kitsap County. My job is to help people to regain and restore their lives from their addiction. And the reason why I got in that field was I'm passionate about it because of my life. I lived that life. Went to jail, did substances, did drugs, sold drugs. I was involved in a lot of illegal activity surrounding drugs. And so when my life changed, it changed for the better. I went back to school, got myself together. Daryl asked me about co-hosting with him on this show, and I agreed to do that because me and Daryl has been friends. We've been through the trenches together and then back out, and I'm so proud of him and the life that he has made for himself. And we're going to do this. We're going to make this happen.
So we named it the Post-Prison Podcast because what happens is, all of us know someone who has gone to prison, who continuously goes in and out of prison, gets in trouble, and all we want for that person is to get out and to get it right. And Cynthia and I are what getting it right looked like she just alluded to. And what we found through our conversations is that through those bouts with incarceration and drug use, we were actually blessed with a gift. And that gift is to kind of inspire and encourage folks and, through conversations, draw the wealth out of folks. So that's what we're here for today. But not only prisons of confinement, we're going to talk about what we like to call situationships and marriages that are like prisons. Some folks are in employment situations and jobs that are like prisons. Some people are caught up in their own emotional thoughts like in a prison. I read a book called that Emotional Incarceration. Some folks, their religions seem like a prison to them or seem like a prison to others. So we want to cover a number of those topics as it relates to prisons, and hopefully through these conversations, you'll hear a little something that'll help you draw the wealth out of yourself. So we're going to begin this with a little evidence of what we're saying about how the prison system was created, how it's supported by our U.S. government and propped up by the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. So we just want to give you a little backstory on how that all came about. So in 1866, 1 year after the 13th Amendment was ratified, the amendment that ended slavery, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi, Florida, and South Carolina began to lease out convicts called peonage. This made the business of arresting blacks very lucrative, which is why hundreds of white men were hired by these states as police officers. Their primary responsibility was to search out and arrest blacks who were in violation of these black codes. Once arrested, these men, women, and children would be led to plantations where they would harvest cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane, or they would be released to work at the coal mines or railroad companies. The owners of these businesses would pay the state for every prisoner who worked for them, which was actually the beginning of prison labor. It is believed that after the passing of the 13th Amendment, about 800,000 blacks were part of a system of peonage or re-enslavement to the prison system. And peonage didn't actually end until after World War II, around 1940. So this is how it happened. After the 13th Amendment, it declared that neither slave nor involuntary servitude, as except punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction, ratified in 1865. But did you catch what the 13th Amendment actually says? Neither slavery nor voluntary servitude could occur except as punishment for a crime. Lawmakers used this phrase to make petty crimes offenses. When blacks were found guilty of committing these crimes, they were imprisoned and then leased out to the same businesses that lost slaves after the passing of the 13th Amendment. This system of convict labor is called peonage. The majority of white Southern farmers and businesses owners hated this 13th Amendment because it took away slave labor. As a way to appease them, the federal government turned a blind eye when Southern states used this clause in the 13th Amendment to establish what's called as black codes. Here are some of the examples of black codes. In Louisiana, it was illegal for a black man to preach to a black congregation without special permission in writing from the president of police. If caught, he could be arrested and fined. If he couldn't pay the fines, which were unbelievably high, he would be forced to work for an individual or go to jail or prison until his debt was paid off. If a black person did not have a job, he or she could be arrested and imprisoned on the simple charge of vagrancy and loitering. The next black code would make you cringe. In South Carolina, if the parent of a black child was considered vagrant, the judicial system allowed the police and or other government agencies to apprentice the child to an employer. Males could be held to the age of 21 and females could be held to the age of 18. Their owner had the legal right to inflict punishment on a child for disobedience and to recapture them if they ran away. So this peonage is an example of systematic racism. Racism established and perpetuated by the government systems. Slavery was made legal by the U.S. government. Segregation was made legal. Black codes and Jim Crow and peonage were all made legal by the government and upheld by the judicial system. These acts of racism were built into the system, which is where the term systematic racism has derived. This is part of black history that nobody talks about, but we're here to talk about it today. So, Miss Cynthia, as we dig into this situation as it relates to prisons, what's your thought on the state of where prisons are and the necessity of them today?
To really evaluate or even think about that question, one of the things I can emphasize on is how it played out in my life. And one of the things is that I think that is where I had, I don't know, the time and the time frame and stuff to really think things through about where I was. Because my prison was not just going to prison. My prison was also being involved with drugs and being caught up in that whole system of drugs and addiction. And so somewhat when I went to prison, I felt like I was set free to a degree. The only problem was the system decided to give me 11 years and 8.5 months for drugs. And here I am with the disease of addiction, and you're gonna take me away from my 8 babies to send me to prison for 11 years instead of offering me help to, get my life together or get my life in order. That's the only thing that's on my record of criminal history is drugs. I mean, I don't have thefts or burglaries or none of that kind of stuff. It was just drugs. And so it just, to me, what happens is that after crack cocaine infiltrated the black communities, which we all know how that happened, it caused a lot of hurt, a lot of grief, and a lot of despair, and a lot of black people got locked up. And what ended up happening is we separated from our kids. Now we got CPS involved. We got all these different issues going on in our lives. And then our children are being raised by other people that don't have the same connection that we would have with our own babies. And instead of them coming up with systems to help restore the family, they're steady splitting them apart. And what I realized is that as soon as the opiate addiction and the meth addiction became prevalent, then the game changed. That's when it became a disease. So we left the criminal element.
You're referring to crack as being a crime. A war on drugs.
Yes.
As opposed to opiates being a healthcare crisis.
A healthcare epidemic.
Yeah.
What they call it.
Absolutely. It changed the whole game.
Well, that's by design. That whole prison system thing was by design, starting with the Reagan era. I mean, it was an intentional effort to start this incarceration system, especially for black males, because we were considered the largest threat in the community during the Nixon and Reagan years. It started a long time ago. So I agree with you that crack was the instance, but it was a plan along with the crack to wear us out. Because for me, I was, and that's one of the things Daryl was going to talk about with us. I got arrested for a fight at 16. And when it was all said and done, I had 2 felonies at 16. You know what I'm saying? And we was trying to get McDonald's jobs, we was trying to do whatever. And it was just so hard at that time and that age to try to figure out, man, what am I doing? My life just started. What am I going to do with a felony on my record? But then to allude to what you talked about, right after that happened in like the summer, beginning of the summer when I turned 16. Well, about a month later, I got introduced to freebase for cocaine at 16, as a baby. So I got these prisons going on in my life, and I got these situations going on, and I got broken homes in my life. The welfare system. All of this was part of the same system to keep us separated and down. So I agree with you that the culmination of them both, it just created a pressure cooker in a lot of neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
We've all lost somebody to the streets and drugs, and it's just a sad state to be in. So, Daryl, I'd like to come to you. I don't think you probably know somebody that has had trouble with the law in situations like that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think that's probably why you invited me on here, is because you and I were having a conversation one day about our teenage years and our kids and some of the dumb things we did.
Yeah.
And I came to this realization that you and I, the only difference between us, there's only 2 differences between us at that age. You spelled Daryl wrong. You spelled it with 2 R's. And you're black and I'm white.
Yeah.
I got in trouble with the police for fighting. When I was a teenager, I did drugs. I did drugs clear into my early adulthood. And it wasn't until, I would say, 22, 23, that I started to get myself straightened out. I would get pulled over, and they would take away my drugs and send me home. If I was drinking and I got pulled over, they'd try and find a way for me to get home safe. I remember, I grew up in Port Orchard, Washington, and I remember very specifically an instance that could be easily defined as the moment that you and I parted ways. Now, we didn't know each other at the time, but we're out carousing, being teenage boys, being stupid, and we were drinking and we were getting high, and we were sitting in the parking lot of, it was called the South Kitsap Mall at that point. It was brand new, and it was middle of the night. And I don't even remember who was in the car. Well, I remember two of the people in the car, but I'm not going to call them out. But there was another car in the parking lot, and we didn't recognize the car, and we didn't recognize the people in the car. It was also a group of young, stupid males that were out doing the same thing, but they weren't from our neighborhood. They weren't from our town. They were in from out of town. They were part of a rival football gang. There'd been a football game, and they were there with their school. And we got into, throwing taunts back and forth, and pretty soon it escalated into, it was getting near a fight. They actually had some guns in their trunk. Somebody heard this, called the police, and a whole bunch of police cars showed up. It was before we'd thrown blows that they saw. They didn't see any of us fighting. But the police hear the whole story. We all told our stories, and we all went home. I don't even know if they took any notes about it. But what they did is they looked at this, and here was just a good group of good kids that were just being a little rambunctious, and we'll just break them up and send them home. And it didn't hit me of the weight of that situation till probably 25 years later. I had forgotten about that almost.
Wow.
Until you and I were talking, and you talked about your first felony. And it's just, there are many instances before that and after that where I was in the exact same type of situation you were. I got caught with drugs, and I had it all set up, rolled into joints to sell. All they did was take it away. I walked onto the campus of Pacific Lutheran University, where I was going to school, with 2 grocery sacks full of marijuana, because I lived the closest and brought it in, and everybody there knew that that's where you went to get weed, except for probably my poor, sweet sister who lived a couple floors above me. And if she's watching, I'm sorry, Cindy, that's what I was doing. But at the end of that year, they gave out dorm awards, these little joke awards. And my roommate and I got the award for being the gardeners of the year. That's the award we got. We got this little handmade plaque. We were drug dealers.
Well, I want to say this before I ask you another question. And Cynthia and I had a lot of conversations about this podcast. What we would say, what we wouldn't touch on, and our objectives. And I just want to state a couple of those here. What we're not here to do. And that is to argue, disparage, to harm, or defame. But we're only here to enlighten and inspire. And part of enlightening is to shed light on some wrongs, or some mishaps, if you will. But getting back to your story, I want to ask you, after you got let go a time or two, what did that do for you as a young white male in America, and how you move forward? Did that help you with any kind of euphoria? Did it help you identify what your privilege was at that age?
Oh God, no.
No?
I had no idea. I had no idea what we talk about privilege, and I had no idea that I had privilege. Anybody that goes around and says their life is blessed, I can't say my life is blessed, because that would say that my life is better than somebody else's. I can say that I have been given circumstances and gotten through things solely because of I was not a black male. And that would be one of them. When you talk about peonage, it kind of hit me. And this has to do with college again. I got to go to college. I dropped out of college twice. I spent most of my young adulthood just kind of wandering around, getting a pass. And when I went back to go to college again, I filled out a FAFSA. That's the free whatever something to get financial aid. And I remember when I filled that out, and there's a box. Have you ever been convicted of a drug offense?
Yes.
That's the only criminal question on there. And that's one of the first times when I started to realize, I'm kind of lucky here. Because there are too many times that I could even mention when I committed a drug offense and got caught. But I didn't have to check that box and be denied financial aid for college, grants, free money grants, not free money, it's paid for with our taxes, but grants and student loans and all of that. I would not have been able to have any of those things.
Did you know any of the police officers?
Oh God, no. I mean, no.
You didn't know any?
No. It was a small town, but I didn't know them.
Basically, it was your skin tone.
Yes. In fact, one time, my dad was a wonderful man, was the pastor of the local Lutheran church there, and my parents were out of town, and I had his keys to the church, and a friend of mine and I went down there, and we were getting high and playing the organ in the middle of the night.
You both.
we were both musicians, and the police came, and we saw the flashing lights. We went run outside and hid in the bushes. Well, they found us, and that's when we had a whole bunch of marijuana rolled up for cigarettes to sell. We got caught with that. Now, we felt we'd been harassed and all of this. We had the right to be in there and everything. And I'm arguing with the police about it. We got the right. I got in there with the keys, blah, 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 blah. My dad's the pastor of the church, and there was no question as to why that was all rolled up in a whole bunch of joints, marijuana cigarettes. It was because we were selling them. Now, after they spent some time harassing us, in our opinion, they let us go. Nobody ever had to come forward and say, yes, he is. They took my word for it. They took Jeff's word. They took my friend's word for it. And they let us go.
So what comes to your mind today, these days, when you think about the prison industrial complex as a white man? Because for the most part, it doesn't really impact your family specifically. Do you have any thought on it? And because elections play a big part in it, and I know you're part of the auditor and things like that. So.
Well, my part of the auditor is account stuff, so I don't, that doesn't affect elections. We just count. But as far as the prison industrial complex, it's a big business. This whole idea of having these private prisons that are for profit to make money off of punishing people.
Yeah.
You can't punish somebody to improve their life.
Well, it's not about punishment.
I know, but
Yeah.
I'm telling you, this is what people will say. We've got to punish people. We've got to punish people. But that's a fallacy. You cannot punish people to improve their life. You've got to give them a hand up.
Yeah.
And the prison system is not giving anybody a hand up.
Yeah.
It's
That's where
pushing them down.
That's where the recidivism come from, is that they don't deal with barriers and deal with issues, like mental health and substance use, and they don't deal with it on a basis of the seriousness of how it impacts the community. Because what you do, you lock them up and then you let them right back out in the same condition, basically.
There's the reason we have a larger percentage of our population in prison in the United States than the whole rest of the world is because of how we look at prisons.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely,
it's a big business.
it's definitely a big business, and that's the bottom line of it. When you see who the investors are in the private business, when I was in prison, most of the guys in prison, they all go for the correctional industry jobs, where you can leave the prisons, where they make everything from clothes to cookies, and they're getting a bag off of that, and then they're only paying the inmates 30 cents an hour. And then when you get out, like she said, the marginalization is at an all-time high. I got out with $200, man, $200, and I had worked in work release.
Some people only get paid money, like $40 or something.
Yeah, well, I worked in work release for 5 months, and they took all my money.
Yeah.
To set me up, like she said, they got a word for it now, recidivism.
Right.
That means you coming back, and they waiting for you.
Yep.
So, it's unfortunate that we're in this space, but we're going to do more talking about it, coming up with more solutions, how to continue to help those who are finding themselves released, because I think that, the big part of that is finding a way to break those cycles.
I believe that the police need to be more community oriented. They need to know, like you said, they didn't know who you were. This is a small area. They need to know who people are and be able to have relationships with people so they can say hey, you need to get up off these streets and go home, or be able to, communicate with their family or something and try to see what they can do about helping the situation instead of just policing, as they call it.
Yeah.
Because to me, it says, for me, I believe that everybody is our neighbor. You're my neighbor, even though I don't live next door to you. But it's my job, if I see you hurting or you in need or whatever, that I reach out to you or I try to help you. Well, I believe that if you're in law enforcement or any of these industries where you are dealing with people, you need to have that same attitude.
You sound like Miss Emma Jerome. So Miss Emma Jerome, my wife and I and my parents, after Hurricane Katrina, we kind of like to build stuff, so we went down there to help. And I got to know this lady named Miss Emma Jerome. We helped with her house, and getting to know her changed my life in a very small but significant way. When we went into work in her neighborhood, she knew every neighbor.
Absolutely.
And everybody's story, and she started asking me about my neighbors. I didn't even know who my neighbors were. and she was just aghast, and she gave me a little bit of a lecture and says, when you go home, you gotta get to know your neighbors. Well, this was, Hurricane Katrina a long time ago, but I know all my neighbors. I came home and I had to get to know, I was inspired by her because she was a catalyst for making her neighborhood better, because she knew all her neighbors and cared. That thing you say about how we need to have policing be part of the neighborhood, and fire and school teachers and neighbors, and I need to, make sure that my neighbor and the house next to me, I'm helping keep an eye on her because she's a little elderly and her kids are grown and gone. You know, that we all got to work together.
Yeah, our job is more than just a paycheck.
Well, we gonna have the goal is to have police chiefs on here. I know we got Carmen Beth scheduled to come on, so I know she's not a police chief now, but the goal is to find conversations to have with these law enforcement, and maybe through those conversations, you know, they'll hear something that will inspire them to, you know, just make a small change that can have a big impact.
Yeah, we got to talk about it.
Yeah, so it's, you know, and you know, we're not here to bash people or, you know, holler and scream about what's wrong, and definitely not approach from a victim's standpoint. You know, we're in a solution-oriented business and the solution conversations, but, you know, I think that, you know, I had a conversation with someone today, and they referenced that, you know, a lot of times law enforcement say when they pull you over, I don't see color. You know, and for me, I think that's offensive. You know, I think if you see a black man in the car, you should realize that that's a black man in the car, because 9 times out of 10, you as a white officers, you have some biases in how you deal with a black person as opposed to a white person. So I think if we could find out, I don't know if we could call it recognition training or something, but don't tell me I don't see color, because then you're dismissive of me. I want you to see my color.
Yeah.
I want you to see me and who I am.
And still treat you with respect.
Yeah.
And we gotta learn about our own biases.
Absolutely.
And everybody has them, and that's hard to do.
Absolutely.
That's hard to do because you got to look inside.
within.
You know, we got one of the things that people will say when you talk about race is, well, you want me to feel guilty because I'm white. Well, that's bullshit. But let me tell you why. Because anybody that's saying, you want me to feel guilty because I'm white, that's a racist statement.
Yeah.
Because I shouldn't be feeling guilty because I'm white. Nobody's asking me to feel guilty because I'm white. What I need to look at is my own internal biases and how that affects the world.
Impact somebody else.
How to impact somebody else. And I didn't write the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
So I don't have to feel guilty about the 13th Amendment. Now, if I don't try to do things to right wrongs, then I need to feel guilty.
Yeah, and what does that look like? Because a lot of times we'll find, you know, well-meaning white people. You know what I'm saying? And they do least of what they should do the most. For me, I think if you had to ask me as a person of color, and I have some real tight people that are white, yourself included, and I had any advice to how you could help with racism, if you will, talk to the people in your family that are racist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, talk to the ones, and you're gonna end up losing some relationships because, you know, everybody not about it, but we got to keep the pressure on to those few who tend to think differently.
Well, and when you're looking at your own biases, the only way you can get past them, in my opinion, is by being brave enough to talk about them.
Confirm.
And you before we were on here, you were talking about, you know, that you don't want to impact my life negatively by having me talk about things from my past.
Right.
And that's because you care about me as a person. As the ignorant about my own biases, I have to have the bravery to ask you about that sort of stuff. I have to, you and I communicate drastically different.
Yeah.
And I have to not be afraid to say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that takes courage. Well, it doesn't for me anymore because I've done it a lot with you.
I'd like to say, I don't like to. If I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room.
Well, I've never had that problem. I've made a career out of working with a lot of smart people.
Well, we know we can't tell it all in one day, and but we did want to come on with this first episode and try to set the groundwork and lay the platform for what we're trying to do, and that's bring awareness to not only just the prison systems, but the marginalization that requires after your release, and also to the families that these people are coming home to, because when you go to prison, your family goes with you. A lot of social adaptation needs to take place. I've been out of prison since December 30th of 2010, and my daughter and I are just now getting to a place where we can communicate effectively, and we can, go back and revisit things that we did wrong, all because of the trauma of me having these experiences. Because, the stuff that I went to prison for in Washington, I probably wouldn't go to prison for in Chicago. The stuff that I went for prison for in Chicago, I probably wouldn't go to prison for in Washington. So it's like extremely arbitrary in most circumstances, and we just have to. We went in our intro. There are like 6 or 7 questions, and those questions ask. One of the first questions asks, "Have you ever done something that, if the circumstances had been different, you could have got in trouble for?" I have yet to meet a person yet to answer no to that question. So when we marginalize people because they've been to prison, we're looking from a space as if we ain't done nothing ourselves that we could be guilty of. Because going to prison ain't about what you did, it's about getting caught. So if we start to understand that and work on these heels, because we got a lot. The biggest thing for Washingtonians is to understand that they're about to decriminalize narcotics. So that means a bunch of people that are in prison for nonviolent drug offenses, who have the propensity to be mostly people of color, are going to be getting on the streets. And what are we going to do? Are we going to be prepared to receive them? What's going to be in place? So thank you, Daryl, for coming on and shed some light and add some validity to what we do. This episode has been titled Daryl versus Daryl, how law enforcement and the system has treated white versus black based upon pigmentation.
And this is only one incident. We know it's several others, but we can't talk about it all.
Yeah, you can't tell it. I know a pastor that I used to live here used to have a famous saying: "You can't tell it all in one day." So I think we're gonna start. We're gonna commandeer that saying, and we're gonna call it a day. But I did want to leave you all with a couple of things. Specifically, our next episode or next week will be what the Washington Supreme Court says about its own racist prosecution and rules against people of color. The Washington State Supreme Court wrote a letter a couple of years ago explaining how they had racist practices and how they destroyed lives of people of color. And we got somebody from the courts that's going to come and have that discussion with us. Her name is Judge Sharonda Amamilo. She's the first Superior Court judge in Thurston County, and she's one of my she-roads. And she's going to come on next week and have this discussion with us. So we're looking forward to having that. I'd also like to ask you all, could you please, man, if you got anything out of this content, to like, subscribe, and share, comment, throw a spitball, whatever you want to do. Just help us get this channel moving. And if you know anybody that's been in prison, or you know anybody that could benefit from this kind of conversation, give them our information. We can be reached at postprisonpodcast@gmail.com. Our website is postprisonpodcast.com. We also have a YouTube at Post Prison Podcast. So, number of ways to get in touch with us. Thank you all. We appreciate you, and good night.
Every morning I wake up, all I I know is get it. The OGs always told me what I start, I gotta finish. So I push it to the limit, so I can be the greatest. So I can look my family in their eyes and say we made it. Don't let life hand you nothing, you just gotta go take it. Always keep it 100, don't ever let me catch you faking. Keep a close eye on your